Surveillance is a thing of the modern era, with new technology being invented almost daily. We've seen an influx of night vision cameras, dash cams, CCTV, and more. But they failed to locate our missing people and solve our homicide cases. It was April of 2022 when Johnny Cashman found himself living alone in an apartment in Lynchburg, Virginia. Johnny allegedly suffered not only from anxiety, but also from bipolar disorder. His sister Sarah and his parents all lived in Maine, but they all kept in close contact. In fact, Johnny spoke to his mother on a daily basis, a routine that would suddenly cease on the 14th of April. Throughout the following days, Johnny's family still hadn't heard from him. As concerns continued to mount, the Lynchburg Police Department was sent to intervene. 5 days after all communication had stopped, officers headed over to 1415 Kemper Street to do a welfare check. There, they would find the 38-year-old deceased. Police then made contact with his family and told them that they'd found Johnny, but that he'd suffered some sort of medical episode. He did have some pre-existing health conditions, information that was passed on to the chief medical examiner. Believing that the passing was due to natural causes, investigators declined an autopsy and gave the go-ahead for the body to be moved. The medical examiner reviewed the remains and concluded that there was no trauma involved. So that was that. Investigators informed the Cashmans of the unfortunate event, and the case was closed. Except it wasn't. Johnny's fate was actually far more sinister than a medical condition, a fact that became obvious when his mother and ex-girlfriend headed to the apartment to collect his things. Nothing could prepare them for the disturbing scene that they were about to walk into. The apartment was in a state of disarray. Red handprints were smeared across the doors, walls, and floors. Pools of vital fluid collected in various areas of the apartment. It was clear something unnerving took place here. By now, all evidence was destroyed with the cremation of Johnny's body. After taking photos of the scene, Johnny's ex stood outside where she met a neighbor. She immediately showed him the pictures. He then informed her that they had a Ring door cam, a vital piece of information that exposed the truth behind Johnny's sudden disappearance and unexpected passing. The neighbor began sifting through all the videos that had been recorded that week until he landed on the day that all communication stopped. And what they saw was truly disturbing. The camera was aimed directly down at the stairs, with Johnny's apartment to the left. The footage shows the man arriving home at 3:03 that afternoon. He was healthy and came bounding up the stairs, seemingly in good spirits. It was here that something harrowing would unfold. As the door closes behind the residence, almost immediately, the voice of a male can be heard. He's shouting to someone, asking them to stop, and "What are you doing?" Banging noises erupted from the apartment shortly after, and 8 minutes later, another male exited the apartment. He closes the door and heads downstairs. At the bottom of the staircase, he turns around and heads back towards the door, pulls his sleeve over his hand and wipes the door handle. Then he exits the apartment, disappearing into the afternoon. Given the good shot of the potential suspect, police were able to quickly identify him. Authorities never named this individual as an official suspect, though, and in October of 2022, they announced they would not be pressing charges in relation to Johnny's passing, citing that the whole case lacked evidence. The scene is set in the darkened early morning hours at the Garden Ridge Easy Mart, located on the 19500 block of FM 3009. It's July 2020, summer, and it was here that a 40-year-old San Antonio resident found herself working the night shift. Pam Smotherman was a beloved store clerk, working alone at the Easy Mart. It was during that shift that she would become the center of what was like a horror movie. With very limited security precautions in place, at around 3 a.m., a man entered the store. Initially believing that he was just another customer, Pam waited for him to approach from behind the counter. On security cameras, the man can be seen entering the store. It's unknown if he headed straight for the clerk or not, but the next thing Pam knew was that a firearm was being pressed to her back. The assailant's identity was concealed by a red bandana wrapped around his lower face. He demanded that the clerk hand over the lottery tickets and all the cash from the register. Even though Pam did as she was told, the assailant still fired, and she was left deceased as he quickly fled. During the ordeal, she did manage to trigger a silent alarm, though. Police would later arrive at the store to find a brutal scene, and an investigation quickly ensued. Despite being captured on camera and appeals being made to the public, the man in the video who took Pam's life couldn't be identified. The family drove around town, showing the image to anyone they came across, asking if the man looked familiar, but it was a fruitless effort. As the community continued their search for a suspect, the Smotherman family was making efforts to ensure that something like this wouldn't happen again. The family began the endeavor to sue the convenience store retailer on the grounds of negligence, wrongful demise, and survival, citing poorly enforced safety procedures as their reasoning. According to the court documents, the retailer had ignored requests from the corporate entity to close up at an earlier hour due to safety concerns, and those concerns certainly presented themselves. By May of that same year, the arbitrator issued a $4.45 million reward in favor of the Smotherman family. In regard to the security concerns at this store in particular, it was found that despite triggering the silent alarm, local police didn't arrive at the scene until 5 minutes later. Pam was also left there alone. Despite video footage of the armed and masked assailant later being found, the robber remains unidentified, and Pam Smotherman's homicide remains unavenged. In 2014, Janice Ozalapa from Oakville was working as a contractor and owned his own company called Oakleaf Renovation. Janice was originally from Latvia and relocated from there to Canada in 2008, where he settled down in Burlington with his family. He was a proud father and was present in his adult children's lives, as well as his younger daughters. The family would stay in constant communication, which is why his absence is outside of the norm for him. It was the 30th of September, 2014, when Janice left one of his work sites, never to be seen again. As he pulled out of Weeping Willow Drive, he headed into obscurity. By that evening, when he still hadn't returned to his Burlington home, family grew concerned. With each passing hour, fears began to mount, eventually leading them to the police station, where 50-year-old Janice would be reported missing. The initial investigation into the strange, unexpected disappearance found no trace of him. Janice had simply vanished. Although he was regularly active on social media, the missing man had not a digital footprint since that day, leading some to wonder if he met with foul play. For months after the disappearance, no significant leads would present themselves, and the case soon fell into obscurity. Then a foreboding discovery would be made. It could have easily been assumed that Janice had been involved in a car accident, driven into a large body of water, or been sent plummeting off a steep cliff. But when someone happened upon the Chevrolet, it became clear that this was not the case. Through a tip from the public, police were led to 157 Cross Avenue, behind an Oakville business. It was here that the truck would be located, but Janice was still missing. The discovery, though, did open a door to allow authorities to narrow down an area where they could start scouring the security footage. Surveillance cameras captured an image of the truck pulling into the dimly lit parking lot across the street. This was at 5:30 in the morning, on the 1st of October, the day after the disappearance was reported. The vehicle was pulling into the Oakville GO station, and moments later, the camera captured the silhouette of an unknown individual making their way back toward Cross Avenue and vanishing from view. The silhouette was difficult to decipher, but when shown to family, they were certain this was not Janice. The family based this conclusion on the person's gait, which was not consistent with the missing man's walk. The discovery of the CCTV footage left many questions for investigators. Who was the shadowy figure? How did they come to acquire the truck? And why did they discard it and flee in a hurry? Information can be directed to the Halton Police Homicide and Missing Person tip line at 905-825-4476. Tom Hagen, a Norwegian billionaire, investor, and co-founder of Elkcraft, married at a young age. He was just 19 years old when he and Anne Elizabeth Hagen were betrothed, an event that took place prior to the riches and fame. The pair seemingly led a quiet and unassuming life, described as down-to-earth and grounded. They'd been living in a suburb of Oslo for the past 40 years and had been driving a simple Citroen car. Although he was a billionaire, Hagen and his wife preferred a simplistic life and lived it in a simple Norwegian home. The traditional styled house had no additional security measures, no high walls or security guards. It was simply a suburban house. Norway isn't a gated community like many other areas, but most do take extra precautions, something that the Hagens hadn't done. It's possibly for this lack of security that Anne became the target of nefarious activities. The story starts at the end of July 2018, when a local newspaper published an article about Hagen and how he earned around 170 million NOK the year before. Fast forward to October 31st, when Hagen leaves his simple home and arrives at his workplace just after 9 a.m. Moments later, he and his wife would have a phone conversation. Anne stayed at home that day with her new puppy. By 9:48 in the morning, ominous things would begin to happen. Tommy Skansen, a neighbor, phoned Anne at the time. He was an electrician who helped her with some light fixtures some weeks earlier and was calling to find out how they were working. When Anne failed to pick up, he knew something was wrong. It was unlike Anne to not pick up the phone. Throughout the day, more friends and family tried to make contact with her, but to no avail. Hagen would arrive back at his home at 1:30 that afternoon, earlier than usual. Almost immediately, he realized something was amiss. The puppy was locked away in a room, and Anne's belongings were lying on a chair. Then, Hagen finds something truly alarming. It's a long letter alongside a cable tie. It was a ransom note demanding 9 million euros in the cryptocurrency Monero. The note eerily stated that the whole family was being watched, and that if anyone contacted the police, things would go horribly wrong. Instructions were also left behind for Hagen, explaining how he could buy more Monero. The billionaire ignored the warnings of Anne being potentially harmed and called the police, stating that his wife was missing and being held for ransom. After 2 p.m., the police met with the man at the gas station. Given the nature of the crime, they couldn't release information to the public, and instead had to secretly gather evidence from the crime scene. During this time, discreet investigations were underway, and Hagen continued to work, but was unsociable. He had to tell neighbors and family that Anne was simply away, and was forced to keep them in the dark. But by the end of November, they'd all figured it out. Anne was missing. Whispers of a kidnapping began to unravel from household to household, but they weren't allowed to say anything. It wouldn't be until the following year, in early January, the police would finally publicly release information. Then, just days after the conference, a video begins to flood news outlets. It came from Hagen's workplace on the day that Anne vanished. It showed an unknown man walking down the road at 7:36 that morning. He abruptly stops, turns around, and heads back. Then, more than 20 minutes later, another comes into frame walking the same way. A cyclist also heads by and would later come forward to police, but the other 2 men remain unidentified. Police believe that these 2 men may have been lookouts. The circulation of the video led to no breakthroughs, and police were forced to investigate other avenues. Adding another layer to this obscure case, the family lawyer received an unexpected email that came from the dark web. The email was also in Norwegian and seemed consistent with the language used in the ransom note, but nothing ever came of this. In a strange twist in the case, Tom Hagen would be arrested on suspicion of his wife's homicide. He maintains his innocence and continues to search for his beloved wife, but no trace of 68-year-old Anne Elizabeth Hagen has come about since the 31st of October, and her case remains unsolved to this day. The end of the year was fast approaching, signaling the start of Derek Seehausen's final year of medical school. He was studying at the University of Southern California and was looking to specialize in anesthesiology. Derek was at the top of his class, scoring in the top 1% of the country in not only MGAT, but also in his licensing exam. As an exceptional student, the 26-year-old had a bright future ahead of him. But the future would be unexpectedly snuffed out come August 5th, 2014. It was that evening that Derek walked out of his apartment and disappeared without a trace. He'd spent the early evening out and about with friends, but decided to retire early so that he could be up for work the following morning. According to those friends, he seemed to be in a good mood and was acting like himself. Upon his departure, he told them that he'd see them later that week, once classes had started. It was assumed that he was heading back to his apartment located in Echo Park, a neighborhood of Los Angeles. The week came and went. Classes had started, and everyone was in attendance, except for Derek. He was never known to skip classes before, and when friends couldn't get a hold of him, alarm bells began to ring. One of them decided to call Derek's parents, who were home in Pennsylvania. They were just as astounded to learn that their son was missing. After making several attempts to reach him, all of which failed, the Seehausens called the police. Officers were sent out to do a welfare check and found Derek's apartment empty. After doing a brief search, they found nothing out of the ordinary and no evidence to suggest foul play. It was as though he'd simply walked out of the door, leaving all of his things behind. His keys, wallet, phone, and laptop were all in the apartment. The only thing missing was his identification card, which wasn't in his wallet, a strange detail that instilled further concern. The check at the apartment failed to yield any trace of his whereabouts, leading police to comb through surveillance cameras in the area. After scouring hours and hours of video footage, detectives managed to piece together some of the missing man's movements. 90 minutes after Derek told his friends that he'd be heading home, he was spotted near the Vons supermarket. It was 10:33 p.m. when he used the ATM inside to withdraw $200 from his account, and then purchased a box of cereal and some milk. Derek was inside the supermarket for around 5 minutes before leaving, supposedly heading home. During the check at the apartment, police discovered that the same box of cereal had been opened. This indicated that Derek made it home and was seemingly interrupted shortly after. The milk was still sealed, and the cash he withdrew was nowhere to be found. It's believed that less than an hour after returning home, he left again to go to a friend's house. He'd given Derek a key to his apartment so that he could study there while he was out of town. The visit to the friend was to return that key. The missing man departed almost immediately and went back to his apartment. Oddly, at 11:54, he would use his mobile app to repay another friend $3,000. Derek had borrowed money from him for his tuition and promised to repay it after graduation, but he'd now done so prematurely for an unknown reason. The friend was surprised to receive the loan back so soon and messaged him the following morning to ask why, but he received no response. At 11:55, leaving his belongings behind, Derek exited his apartment for the final time. He was spotted on camera walking west on Sunset Boulevard and then crossing to Alvarado Street. The med student headed north and was sighted on surveillance footage for the last time at 12:02, still heading north. No one knows where he went after this. It would have taken Derek no more than 7 minutes to be spotted by the next camera, but he never made it that far before he vanished, never to be seen again. Information regarding this missing person can be directed to the Los Angeles Police Department at 213-996-1800. Very little is known about the background of Dutch resident Martin Dikhoff. He's thought to have been born in either 1979 or 1980 and had been living in the town for at least 25 years. Life seemed to be going well for Martin until 2024, when a bizarre turn of events plagued the Dikhoff family. It started on the 23rd of January, when he opted to take a quick trip from the Netherlands to the coastal city of Ostend in Belgium. This wasn't his first time in the city, but he regularly traveled there to visit the gaming halls. Martin checked into the Andromeda Hotel at 11:15 that evening. Andromeda Hotel is a luxury hotel located near a casino. After arriving there and getting settled, he would then head to Casino Cursal and was captured on the casino's CCTV cameras at the slot machines. And at 12:30 on the morning of the 24th, he was seen putting his coat on and heading outside. But the footage reveals that Martin wasn't very interested in gambling. Instead, he was restless and on his phone. It's unclear where he went after that, since the cameras didn't capture his departure. But he would be seen again on CCTV footage, entering the underground parking garage at the hotel where he was staying. This was at 4 in the morning, leaving his movements unknown for the last 3.5 hours. Martin would leave the hotel again that early morning, but never checked out. He would last be seen at 4:52 a.m. on security cameras surrounding the Esso gas station on Drongen in Belgium, filling up his gas tank and buying a coffee. Aside from initially seeming restless, this footage appeared normal, with nothing out of the ordinary. Martin left the area, and 2 days later his family would report him missing. Law enforcement, with the help of CCTV footage, were able to put his last movements together and discovered that he'd visited the casino earlier that day, too. He'd gone to the casino and then started making his way back to the Netherlands before turning back and heading to the slot machines a second time, which is the moment captured on surveillance. Tracking Martin's movements through CCTV proved difficult after the gas station. Instead, investigators tracked his cell phone and his vehicle's onboard computer. After leaving the gas station, Martin headed for Antwerp before turning onto the R4 highway towards Ghent. Around 5:16 that morning, his phone abruptly turned off. Luckily, his movements could still be tracked through the vehicle, and he was heading towards the Dutch border before turning around again and heading back to Belgium. After this, Martin couldn't be tracked further, but it's believed that he never made it back there or to the Netherlands. Despite interviews, it appears no one saw anything, and police were left with nothing once more, leaving the case of Martin de Koff an enduring mystery. On the 8th of December in 2012, Alan, the son of 85-year-old Lowell Badger, headed to his father's Sullivan County, Indiana home. Lowell was a family man and was very loved in the small community. He and his wife had raised 3 children together. In his retirement, he devoted his life to the church, where he would volunteer, helping with anything that was needed. Lowell, according to neighbors, was the kindest man they'd ever met. He was a retired farmer living a quiet life. It was the early morning hours, and this heartwarming image of the man would be shattered. Alan would come across a grisly sight in the living room of 10447 West County Road. It was Lowell, lying on the floor, red-stained and deceased. He'd been assaulted and fired at, the motive being obvious: robbery. Numerous electronics had disappeared from the house. This included the television set and several other objects. Lowell's safe, a John D. Brush & Company, was a dark gray color, measuring 23 inches tall and 17 inches wide. Alan contacted the authorities when he discovered this unfortunate scene. As investigators traveled the roads looking for any sign of the potential suspect, they would discover various electronics strewn along the rural roads leading away from Lowell's home. Upon further investigation, it was confirmed that the objects belonged to the victim. Police turned their attention to the search for one particular object that may be the key to cracking the case wide open: the safe. For days, law enforcement scoured the roads, ponds, lakes, and rivers in search of the unmistakable safe, but to no avail. Then, just when all hope seemed lost, authorities discovered some suspicious-looking surveillance footage. The video came from the closest gas station, and it was time-stamped around the suspected time of the robbery, which was believed to be between 9 p.m. on the 7th and 5 a.m. on the 8th. The security camera managed to capture the moment that a dark-colored vehicle pulled into the gas station. 2 men come into the frame around the vehicle, with one of them wearing a hat, making his way to the other side. It seems that they get back into the vehicle and drive away. Authorities believed that tracking down these possible suspects would be easy, given the small population of the area. Stills from the footage were released in hopes that someone may be able to identify the men. The first suspect was William Grimes, then Richard Taft, and then Grimes's brother, Arthur. Taft claimed that although he held a firearm, he was not the one to pull the trigger. He pointed the finger at another suspect, but that suspect denied his involvement in the crime, and his mother positively stated her son wasn't capable of such a thing. Witnesses allegedly saw Taft crying for days or even months after the event took place. Despite the indictments that have taken place, the investigation is still ongoing. Trials for the suspects are still underway as of 2025, leaving the case on the brink of being solved. The morning of the 21st of October 2020 began as expected for James Allen White, who's known mostly by his middle name. James Allen had a husband named Rusty, and the Dallas residents were up before sunrise, as they often were, and both went to their separate gyms. The couple's routine was like clockwork, and they would expect to see one another back home at 6 a.m. Rusty arrived at the home but was shocked to find that his partner was not around. While immediately concerned, he decided to give it a few minutes, hoping that his husband had just gotten stuck in a long conversation or something. By 6:15 that morning, calls and texts to Alan would go unanswered. And when he missed his 7 a.m. conference call, alarm bells began to ring. Concerned for his well-being, Rusty headed out, scouring the streets and phoning the hospitals, but to no avail. Further adding to the support that he was not one to break routine, Alan had planned an itinerary for the next few days with his niece and her fiancé, who were in town. They'd arrived the evening before, and Alan was excited to see them, but their expected meetup came and went with no word from Alan. By 11 o'clock that day, Alan would be reported missing. While law enforcement was conducting inquiries, Alan's niece spent the evening trying to log into his laptop to track his phone, a fruitless effort. In the days to follow, critical details began to appear, including security footage allowing detectives to piece together his last movements. Alan was seen leaving the gym and walking alone to his 2019 Porsche Macan. He was seen next at 5:39 that morning on a security camera at the racetrack gas station, located at Inwood Road. This was an odd detail, since the gas station was 8 minutes out of his way, and not along his regular route. At 6:01, records showed that he purchased gas but lingered in the store for a few minutes before leaving. But the 55-year-old didn't leave the property, and instead parked behind the adjacent eatery. Eventually, he left the lot and headed back on his regular route. Alan doesn't appear on CCTV footage again, indicating that for an unknown reason, he took a different turnoff. A week later, his vehicle was found 15 miles away from his last known location, Kitty Street. This was noted to be a dumping ground, and it appeared that the car was being intentionally concealed behind the shrubs. Following this discovery, the case was changed to endangered missing, and law enforcement began to conduct their interviews. In the months to follow, no significant leads came about that would lead to Alan's whereabouts. Rusty sold their home since he couldn't maintain it by himself, and the family waited for any new information to come about. On the 13th of May, the following year, that information would finally come, but it was not what they were hoping for. A surveyor for Paul Quinn College discovered the remains of Alan in a wooded area, north of the campus, and 1 mile away from where the Porsche was discovered. The COD was never publicized, and no additional information about the body was released. Following the discovery and investigation, Alan would be buried in a family plot in West Virginia. His case finally solved. Donnie Farrell, a sophomore of Rowan University, would meet an unfortunate and tragic demise at 9 p.m. on a Saturday night when the young man was walking with a group of friends close to the residential buildings off Mullica Hill Road. Donnie and his friends were approached by a group of men who asked them if they knew where the campus parties were taking place. Donnie turned to point out some of the spots, and just then they attacked. Despite being a well-lit area and several witnesses being present, the young man was assaulted by the group. Before the friends could even react to what happened, they all scattered. The assailants managed to score a phone and a wallet, but at the cost of the college student's life. Friends managed to get Donnie to a hospital, but he would succumb to a ruptured artery in his neck the following day. The brazen robbery turned to a homicide investigation. Detectives began searching for clues and evidence and interviewed witnesses, hoping that the attackers could be identified. Through these efforts, they would come across CCTV footage from an express mart located on Route 322. It showed one of the suspects purchasing cigars there prior to the attack on Donnie. Police released the footage to the public, hoping that the man could be identified. He stood 6 feet tall and looked to be between the ages of 18 and 24, but could now be between 36 and 42 as of 2025. The suspect wore a Cougie hoodie and Yankees baseball hat. While talking to a woman at the store, the man allegedly referred to himself as Smoke, who was from AC. Following further investigation, including tracking the potential origins of the Cougie hoodie, authorities theorized that the group wasn't even from the area. Police also spoke to the woman who Smoke was talking to, and discovered that he'd given her his phone number, but she found the man too creepy and threw it away. Although they searched for the piece of paper, it couldn't be found. Ultimately, Donnie's case would go cold, and be left unsolved. 18 years have since passed, and his attacker remains unidentified and has managed to elude justice still. Colombian-born Maria Claudia Murphy found herself in high spirits on the 16th of March in 2012. She and her husband of 9 years, Frank, were planning a big move from Florida to Nashville, a great change that Maria was looking forward to. She was excited about this move because of its proximity to their North Carolina cabin. She was passionate about the outdoors and animals. The space and wild freedom would be great for her dogs that she brought with her everywhere. On that day, just before 1 p.m., Maria would deposit $5,000 into her account at a bank near her Coral Springs home. It's thought that this money was connected to the move. The 45-year-old would then head to a Colombian restaurant, which she was known to frequent. She parked in the car park, grabbed her purse, and headed east on Sample Road. This particular road is a main road in South Carolina, and she was captured twice in surveillance footage walking on it without her dogs, a very rare occurrence for her. Maria walked 4 miles, at least 2 hours, in 90-degree Florida weather. A friend would later see her walking the same route, red-faced and sweating. And then she was last seen alive on the street corner as she headed eastbound and enigmatically disappeared. After being reported missing, police discovered that Maria, although she had her purse, failed to take her cell phone with her. Frank and their adult son couldn't figure out why she would just vanish. They noted that in the weeks before, she had suffered a stomach virus, which seemed to have cleared up by then. Despite search efforts and public appeals, the whereabouts of Maria Murphy remained a mystery. Then, 4 months later, on the 5th of July 2012, a harrowing discovery was made. While hiking deep in the Tradewinds Park, hikers came across skeletal remains still fully clothed. The remains belonged to Maria, who'd been there for months, leaving only dental records and personal items as the only means of identification. Even though they had her body, a COD couldn't be determined, which left this haunting case unsolved. It remains unknown how she met her demise or how she ended up in the wooded area. Since the start of the investigation, though, various strange details have presented themselves. The first was that Maria had chosen to leave her dogs behind that day for reasons unknown. Frank, a reptile breeder, also indicated that on the day his wife vanished, a reptile buyer was due to make a stop there, but he never showed up. Police also backtracked some information that they initially released, including the statement that Maria was found with her purse. After the retraction, law enforcement declined to release any information about what was found. The case continues to haunt the Florida community, which is still in search of answers. A shadowy stalker, a night driver, an unseen figure made itself present in the life of Janine Vaughn. It appeared that her every movement was being watched. Not long after moving to Bathurst, New South Wales, Janine Vaughn reported that she was being targeted by a stalker. In fact, she'd made several calls to the police as early as 1998, where she insisted she was being followed by an unknown person. On the 21st of September that year, there was an ordeal in which Janine received a harrowing note from her alleged stalker. She'd parked her car at the Red Rooster, and upon returning to it, she discovered the message on her windscreen. "Don't be scared of me. I don't want to hurt you. I just want to get to know you. I'll be in touch." But it seemed that perhaps this elusive figure did mean harm. This report was only one of 6 other incidents documented by the same victim, yet no action was taken. The note was also only one of several more that would pop up later in the case. With the idea of a stalker in mind, we find ourselves in the early morning hours of the 7th of October, 2001, and it would be on this day that 31-year-old Janine Vaughn would vanish. That evening, she and a group of friends headed for a night out at the Metro Tavern on George Street. It was here that she would lose her handbag, which contained her mobile phone, money, and house keys. For unknown reasons, the group of friends left the tavern close to 4 a.m. that morning. Janine was walking in front of her friends by at least 40 meters on Keppel Street. Described as a vivacious individual, Janine enjoyed all kinds of sports and took part in hair and fashion shows. Friends and family also described her as incredibly cautious. She wouldn't just interact with any stranger, and she certainly wouldn't get into an unknown person's vehicle. At 4 a.m., though, this is exactly what she would do. As the group were walking along the roadside, a red 4-door sedan pulled up alongside them. It was a late 90s model, similar in shape to the Toyota Camry or Mitsubishi Magna. The woman would quickly get into the red car, a harrowing moment that was spotted on surveillance footage. The car drove off, never to be seen again, along with Janine, whose fate remains a mystery to this day. Days had passed with no sign of the missing woman, prompting the family to report her missing. During the early stages of the investigation, various strange pieces of information would begin to emerge. First, Janine's missing handbag would be discovered by the cleaner, who believed that the item was intentionally hidden, given the way that it was squished in the corner. Someone had even put a packet in front of it in an effort to hide it. The next piece of evidence was of notable interest. It was a diary belonging to the missing woman. It spoke of daunting concerns regarding a local policeman, Mr. Hosemans. It indicated that he was who was her stalker. Police would later clear him of any wrongdoing after having conducted several interviews and drilling a hole into the concrete floor of his home. Hosemans denied being involved in the disappearance and claimed to have an alibi for that day. In the months leading up to Janine's disappearance, he allegedly had no contact with her. On the 21st of December, Janine's father would walk into the police station with a handful of notes that were addressed to his daughter. They were from her stalker, but it isn't clarified if they were specifically from Hosemans or possibly someone else. No fingerprints were found on them. Adding to this was that in the time leading up to Janine's disappearance, a similar car had been documented in similar cases involving women in the area, but the driver's identity was never revealed in any of these reports. After an anonymous letter made its way to the police department, accusing the police of being involved in a cover-up and allegedly naming Hosemans as the suspect in the disappearance, another investigation was launched in 2005. In the months to follow, though, multiple alleged witnesses would claim that another man had been going around asserting that he was involved in the disappearance, only adding even more complicated layers to this enduring mystery. Neither man was ever found guilty, and no charges were ever placed. The mysterious disappearance of Janine Vaughn remains unsolved to this day. A reward of $1 million is being offered for any information that may lead to her whereabouts. Any information can be directed to Crime Stoppers at 1-800-333-000. Ethel Shannon McCarson, the youngest of 3 siblings, was born in Rockmart, Georgia. Growing up, Ethel was enthusiastic and ambitious about life. But at the age of 21, she would suffer a breakdown amid her studies to become an airplane mechanic. Ultimately, she would be told that she had paranoid schizophrenia, a diagnosis that would slowly take over her life. In adulthood, the woman would only have a few friends and occasionally lived on the streets. Ethel was known to travel often and would stay in contact with family through the help of strangers. She didn't have a cell phone and was therefore not on social media, often relying on payphones or the odd passerby to make contact with her mother and sister. But it seems that at some point, she may have run into the wrong person. Ethel was 42 years old when she arrived at the Orlando Greyhound Station, located on North John Young Parkway on the 4th of April in 2016, marking the start of an unfortunate and disturbing tragedy. Surveillance footage recorded Ethel walking through the station before sitting down on the ground outside. The video shows a woman wearing a red shirt approaching her, and the two begin to chat. They talk to one another for almost 2 minutes, with Ethel sitting on the ground and the woman standing nearby. Just as a white car pulls into view in the parking lot, Ethel gets up. The vehicle drives out of view of the camera, and Ethel too disappears out of range. It's unknown if she'd approached the vehicle and gotten inside, or if it was just a coincidence that she got up when it pulled into view. Nonetheless, this would be the last sighting of Ethel McCarson until 2 days later. On the 6th of April, 2016, a shocking discovery would be made. It was in Orange County, in the wooded area of Old Winter Garden Road, and the lifeless body of Ethel would be found. Most gruesomely, she wasn't just deceased. She'd been the victim of a terrible crime, one that would leave her mutilated. The medical examiner believed that the crime scene had taken place elsewhere and probably occurred within a day after arriving in Orlando. The motive for such a heinous crime would be hard to come by. Given Ethel's nomadic lifestyle, investigators could find very little information on her movements that day. They couldn't determine why she was in Orlando in the first place, if she knew the woman in the red shirt, or anyone in the area for that matter. Her presence and homicide were certainly mysterious. The identity of the woman in the red shirt and the driver of the white vehicle remains unknown, but police believe that they may have some crucial information that may allow them to track Ethel's movements that day and piece together the homicidal mystery. The two individuals, though, are not considered suspects. Anyone with information is encouraged to call Crime Line at 1-800-423-8477 and may be rewarded $10,000 for any information that leads to the solution of what happened that fateful day. It was the evening of the 28th of November back in 1994. Brian Fogath, a 23-year-old clerk, clocked in at the Duke and Duchess convenience store located in Brimfield, Ohio. The problem was that he wasn't supposed to be there. Brian had agreed to cover for a coworker at the last minute. Without hesitation, he headed to the edge of town, the quiet stretch of State Route 43 that met with the lanes of Interstate 76. The Duke and Duchess were the only source of light in the darkened void. It was 2 a.m., but Brian was no stranger to late nights. He'd often taken up the night shift to pay his bills. He only lived minutes away on Northfield Drive. It came as no shock that his coworker would enlist his help. Brian was dependable and kind-hearted. He wouldn't just turn down a friend in need. In the quietness of Brimfield, he was an ambitious person. Still, that night, he wasn't supposed to be there. It was a clear case of the wrong place, wrong time. It was this sudden shift that would lead him to become the unwilling center of a haunting cold case, a mystery that stalks Ohio to this day. Against the backdrop of cold Ohio fields just after 2 a.m., Brian began mopping the floor, finishing up his expected duties. This evening, he would see very few customers, and those who stepped through the swinging doors were usually tired truckers or passers-by. That night was eerily quiet. Not many people came in until one did. The silence was disrupted with the appearance of a masked figure coming into frame of the convenience store's surveillance camera. It was at this moment that Brian's fate was secured. It didn't matter what he did, he wouldn't be going home that morning. With the drawing of a firearm, Brian was ushered into the back office, disappearing from the camera's sight. It's unknown what words were exchanged or what happened in that room, but moments later, the clerk would reemerge and open the cash register. Under the gaze of an armed robber, he began to load up a bag with bills. Most methodically, Brian's hand reached underneath the counter, where the button for the silent alarm would alert the Brimfield Police Department that something was wrong. The robber had no idea that the alarm bell had been sounded, but he was startled nonetheless. Just then, a car pulled up outside. The store chime rang, and the assailant was pushed over the edge. Losing his concentration, the robber would be tackled by Brian, who lunged at him, his fist connecting with the masked man's face. In those harrowing seconds, the clerk was fighting for his life. Then that anticipated bang echoed through the fields, and the robber was gone moments later. It took only minutes for the entire ordeal to take place and disperse. The police had arrived at 2:04 that morning, but it was too late. As of 2025, the cold case homicide of Brian Fogath remains unsolved. 3 decades have passed, and all that remains is that haunting, grainy footage. There was nothing in the bushes, no sign of her in the swamp or the grass fields. Danielle Nyland was simply gone. The last place the 23-year-old was seen was just outside of Saskatchewan. The oldest of 3 siblings, a family-oriented, bubbly, and carefree woman, was last seen with her friends on the 7th of June in 2015 for a night out. They'd been in the East Flat area of Prince Albert. The following day, on the 8th of June, just before 8 a.m., Danielle was spotted at a Shellbrook gas station, and then she vanished. Worried for his niece's safety, Peter Nyland orchestrated early search parties, but when still no trace of her was found, he reported the woman missing to the RCMP on the 10th of June. Despite initial efforts, not a shoe, coat, or fiber of hair would ever be found. Days passed, and the family got more concerned by the minute. It wasn't like her to just disappear. The daunting 2-week mark was quickly approaching, but on the 11th day, police would make an unfortunate discovery. near a trail in a wooded area 500 miles south of the location where she was last seen. The body of Danielle was found. 500 miles north of her remains, her cell phone lay at the end of a driveway, 9.5 kilometers east of Shellbrook. An autopsy was conducted, only to find that no conclusive COD could be found. Police were unable to determine if Danielle had been the victim of a homicide, but they knew for certain that her passing was suspicious. Those suspicions rose when detectives uncovered some surveillance footage of a car that they believed may have been involved in the case. The brief video shows a black Chevrolet carrying 4 passengers to a stop at a business at the intersection of Highway 55 and Highway 3 on the 8th of June. 75 minutes later, the same vehicle is spotted again at the business, carrying only 2 passengers. That suspicious vehicle has since been located and was found in Prince Albert 2 days after Danielle vanished. It hasn't been revealed if the vehicle was abandoned or if the owners had been located. Danielle's family and friends are still in search of answers and justice. Despite investigations, interviews, and inquiries into her last movements, the disappearance and demise of the Saskatchewan resident remains a mystery. Information can be directed to 306-747-2606. Cole Thomas was taking a bit of a break from college to work a construction job in an effort to earn more money. In the fall of 2016, the 22-year-old would find himself engaged in electrical work in Minnesota. It was close to Thanksgiving. Cole was about to make the journey home to Florida to celebrate the holiday. He was approached by a few of his coworkers whom he'd recently met, and they asked him if he could drive them to North Carolina, presumably so that they could get home for the holidays too. Cole agreed, not knowing that this trip may be his very last. The day after Thanksgiving, on the 25th of November, something was very wrong. Chris Thomas, Cole's father, pulled up to the driveway, only to find his frantic wife on the phone with the police. Cole was missing. The distraught couple loaded their truck and headed straight for Benson, North Carolina, where the young man was last seen. 2 of the coworkers who were with him during the trip claimed that they were traveling the I-40 when Cole got off the interstate, turned into a residential area, and put the car in park near Elm and Morgan Streets. Most bizarrely, he just jumped out of the car and ran away. No one has seen or heard from him since. Cole's case was one of those disappearances in which the entire community got involved in trying to locate him. Search parties were organized and various efforts were made, but the man was simply gone. Massive searches yielded no results. In an effort to piece together Cole's last known movements, police began to scour the surveillance footage of various businesses, stores, and gas stations along his route. Through this search, Benson police would discover the very last footage of the man before he enigmatically disappeared. The surveillance images came from a convenience store, showing Cole in a light blue shirt and a baseball hat. Despite this lead, no further breakthroughs have been made. But the case doesn't end there. Chris would later reveal that, to his understanding, his son and the coworkers had allegedly picked up narcotics, which led him to experience a paranoid episode. It's uncertain if he had taken the narcotics or if being in possession of them is what caused his panic. All that's certain is that Cole had vanished. 1 year after the disappearance and presumed demise, 4 men were arrested and charged allegedly for concealing a body. But as of 2025, Cole or his remains have not been found, and his case remains an enduring mystery today. Any information can be directed to the Benson Police at 919-894-2091. When going for a family trip to the beach, the last thing anyone would expect is to happen upon the body of a deceased man. But this is exactly what happened on Cornish Beach in Perranporth, England on the 25th of February, 2014. An elderly, unclothed man washed ashore wearing 2 socks on his feet and only 1 shoe. It was anyone's guess that this was a drowning, a case of man overboard, an accident. When police arrived at the scene, though, it would become hauntingly clear this was not the case. Locked between the man's jaw was a rolled-up sock bound with a pair of white iPod earbuds, which were left dangling from his mouth. The sock in his mouth appeared to be secured there by the earbuds, which were looped around from behind. The still unidentified man seemed to have sustained significant injury to his skin. He was covered in cuts and bruises all over his chest, scalp, and hands. As investigations of the grisly sight were underway, it was also discovered that he'd suffered some internal injuries too. This was no drowning accident. Moments later, police found a raincoat near the person. Inside its pockets were a wallet and a wet 10-pound note. A wool hat, a backpack that contained loose plasters, and a pin were also there. The wallet leads to the identification of the deceased. He was Alan Geel, a 64-year-old man from Wadebridge who lived alone. There was also a picture of Alan inside the wallet from when he was just 2 years old, and another 95 pounds in cash. With the identification of the body secured, detectives could now start looking into what may have happened to the man. This would lead them to CCTV footage that showed Alan wearing a light blue raincoat, a different raincoat from the one discovered near his remains. The first surveillance images showed Alan without the coat, drawing money from an ATM on Molesworth Street in Wadebridge at 12:10 p.m., the day before he washed ashore. The next surveillance camera sighting of the man came at 4:15 that same day. He was captured on camera at Jovena Hill, this time with the light blue raincoat and the backpack. He was heading toward the town center after having left his apartment, which was located further up the road. Police investigated Alan's computer activity, which showed he'd been searching bus routes for the few minutes that he was home. 4 minutes later, he would board the number 594 bus. The next sighting of him would come from surveillance cameras, where Alan arrives at Lemon Quay bus station at 6:14 p.m. At 6:36, he was seen walking down Boscawen Street, and a few minutes later, he was seen talking to a man at the bus station. It appeared that the man would head to New Quay and arrive there at 8:16 p.m. Cameras would capture him getting off the bus before he heads towards the town center. At 9 p.m. that evening, he returned to the bus station and got on a bus that was destined for Perranporth. From 10:25 to 10:27, CCTV footage would spot Alan for the last time. He was seen walking along Beach Road, close to where his body would be discovered the following day. Aside from the chat that he had with the man at the bus station, no other interactions were recorded on the surveillance camera, including whatever altercation occurred between his last sighting and his demise. The surveillance footage marked a dead end in this case. Police were unable to locate any of his other belongings, including his Barclay bank account card, his credit card, a Nokia 1110i mobile phone, or his iPod Shuffle. The missing items suggest a robbery, although authorities wonder why a robber would leave the cash behind. Most strangely, the mate to the man's lonesome shoe that was still on Alan's foot was discovered in a nearby cave, but no real answers in this case have ever been found. The question remains, was Alan Geel the victim of a homicide, or was his demise some sort of unfortunate accident? Jesse Ross was attending the University of Missouri as a sophomore. In November of 2006, the America Model United Nations Conference would be held in Chicago. Jesse was planning on attending the conference with another 1,200 students. The students would be staying in one of 3 locations, with the young man being at the Sheraton Chicago Hotel and Towers with 14 other classmates. The 19-year-old would be bunking with his friend Ralph Parker, who attended the same high school as him. The event would last 3 days, beginning on the 18th of November and ending on the 21st. That Monday, Jesse and Ralph headed to the Hard Rock Cafe and would later join the other students for the dance at the Four Points Sheraton Hotel, which ran from 6 p.m. to 9:30 p.m. Following the dance, the visitors would make their way back to their allocated hotel in preparation for a planned meeting. Just after 2 that morning, the students would assemble for a mock emergency United Nations Security Council meeting at the Four Points Sheraton Hotel. Half an hour later, Jesse got up from his chair and walked into the lobby, telling his fellow peers that he was taking a half-hour break. But the student would never return. Surveillance footage in the lobby would provide the very last sighting of Jesse. He can be seen in the hotel elevator walking through the lobby and toward the main doors at around 2:30 that morning. Initially, the others believed he'd returned to the Sheraton Chicago Hotel and Towers, which was just a 10-minute walk away. Although it was late, the route between those two hotels was well lit, and it was known for being the safer part of town. But despite this, Jesse Ross would enigmatically vanish in the early hours of that morning. The mock meeting concluded at 5:30, and Ralph headed back to his room, where he saw a pile of clothes on Jesse's bed that he mistook for being his sleeping friend. 5 hours later, Ralph awoke to see the dimly lit lump was actually a clothing pile, but he still wasn't too concerned, believing that his friend had been sleeping somewhere else. Ralph would make several attempts to phone him, but these efforts were fruitless. After 1 p.m. that day, the security was alerted, and by 4 p.m., the cops were in the corridors. Investigators scoured each of the rooms but found no sign of Jesse or any indication of foul play. The investigation would lead them to the lobby camera footage, but from there, the movements of the missing man remain unclear. The street between the two hotels was lined with multiple security cameras, but none of them would capture footage of Jesse after he left the hotel. Given the lack of footage, police began to surmise that he hadn't left through the main doors, but instead used a side exit and subsequently disappeared into thin air. Detectives would later learn that Jesse was interested in becoming a DJ, so they began following up with local raves. The possibility was presented that he'd gone to an underground illegal rave held at an abandoned building. This was supported by the CDs and flyers promoting his band. The student's cell phone pinged last at 3:30 a.m., less than an hour after his disappearance. Various theories have been presented in the case in an effort to explain what happened to Jesse Ross, but with virtually no evidence, the case remains a mystery. Information can be directed to the Chicago Police Department at 312-744-8266. Between 1996 and 1997, Claremont, Australia was not a safe place for women. It was that year that the Claremont slayings were underway. Women were being reported missing, vanished from the face of the earth, and others were found deceased, their lives taken by a shadowy and elusive figure. In June of 1996, Jane Louise Rimmer was one such young woman who would enigmatically disappear. The 23-year-old spent her evening on the 8th partying with friends in the Claremont area, a suburb of Perth, Australia. The group started their night at the Continental Hotel and then headed to Club Bayview, a nightclub located nearby. But they wouldn't enter the establishment and instead decided to go back to a friend's house where they'd continue partying. Around midnight, the friends decided to go back to the Continental Hotel. When they arrived there, Jane opted to go home and watched as her friends got in a taxi and drove off. She began her walk back to her apartment, and that was the last time anyone would see her alive. The only other sighting of her came from a CCTV camera at the hotel. The footage revealed something eerie, an image that would instill a sense of foreboding. In the footage, Jane is seen being approached by an unknown man right after splitting from her friends. The two appeared to be speaking to one another before the footage ominously switched to a different view. As the video focused on Jane and the man again, they were both gone. In a matter of minutes, they had vanished, and the footage didn't catch either of them leaving. Jane never made it back home that evening. She was reported missing, and various searches commenced to find her, but she was gone. Just 5 months earlier, another woman, Sarah Spires, had vanished from Club Bayview. 9 months later, Sierra Glennon vanished too, and the Western Australia Police set up a task force to investigate if the cases were connected. In the interim, almost 2 months after she had disappeared, Jane's lifeless body was discovered in Wellard. The investigation into the other disappearances and the demise of both Sierra and Jane revealed that they were connected to a series of slayings that plagued the area at that time. In 2016, their cases were connected to Bradley Robert Edwards, who was detained on suspicion of being the Claremont maniac. Edwards was sentenced to life in prison for the slayings of Jane and Sierra, but as for Sarah Spires, her remains have never been found. In 2022, Rasheem Carter was working as a contract worker for the Georgia Pacific plant in Taylorville. The 25-year-old Fayette native was living near Motel 8 in Laurel, Mississippi. On the 2nd of October, he spoke with his mother Tiffany, informing her that he was suffering discrimination in the workplace. He told her that there were 3 trucks full of men who were out to get him. During their phone call, he also reported he was struggling to get a ride home from work. Reports indicate that Rashim would be regularly driven home by an individual who refused to give him a lift on this particular day. Instead, he headed to a nearby police station to inquire about an Uber option. In fact, Rashim had been to the Taylorsville Police Department before, where he'd notified officers that he was concerned about his safety. His visit on the 2nd of October marked the second time that he would head to the police station before his disappearance. After being unsuccessful in finding a ride, Tiffany would enlist a friend to pick him up the next day. But when they arrived at the location, Rashim was nowhere to be found. The Taylorsville Police Department launched an investigation, and search parties congregated to look for him. That search also reviewed some security footage that would reveal his last movements, including from a local Family Dollar store, where he was known to have been seen. Despite the massive search effort, Rashim wasn't located until a month later, but the discovery led to no sighs of relief. The 25-year-old's body had been found in a wooded area, and it was a harrowing sight. Strewn across the ground in various parts of the woods were appendages and fragments belonging to the now deceased man. It appeared initially as an animal attack, only to be declared as a hate crime in later investigations. This, according to the family's attorney, was no animal assault. It was an intentional act of evil, supported by an autopsy that showed signs of intentional degradation. Due to the state of the remains, the medical examiner couldn't pinpoint the COD, and his demise was ruled as intermediate. But with more information coming to life in the days leading up to his disappearance, the possibility that Rashim was a homicide victim became more and more likely. Most disturbingly, he was spotted on a trail camera just moments before he was slain. Only an image of that footage was published, but it revealed a terrifying moment in which Rashim was running for his life through the woods, carrying what appeared to be a large branch. The footage made it clear that something was going on that day, something terrifying. Despite the suspicious and peculiar way in which Rashim's remains were found and the haunting footage, there was no evidence that pointed to foul play, leaving his case unsolved and active. No one knows what happened to Rashim that fateful day, but it was something truly disturbing. The name Michael Mosley may sound familiar to some. Not only was he a British doctor, but a television presenter. He'd made a name for himself through decades of hosting science programs on BBC, making health and science a fun experience. But in 2024, his career would come to a screeching halt when he mysteriously disappeared in June, catching the world's attention. At the time, he was on holiday on the Greek island of Symi with his wife, Claire. Michael was last seen by his wife at around 1:30 p.m. on the 5th of June. He departed their holiday home and went for a short stroll from Agios Nikolaos Beach to Peti, the fishing village. The route was about 1.4 kilometers long, which would take around 20 minutes to walk. At 1:52 p.m., a surveillance camera located along the route in the main street of Peti would capture Michael in his polo shirt, backpack, baseball hat, and umbrella, protecting him from the harsh sun. It appeared that he was heading toward Rocky Hills. This footage marks the last known sighting of the 67-year-old. When the British man failed to return to his wife later that afternoon, she reported him missing, and an immediate search was launched. A broad search operation began that day. Britain's Foreign Office and Greek authorities were in contact, hoping that a combined effort would lead to the discovery of the missing man. The Greek fire department was enlisted in the search and arrived with a drone team. A helicopter and canine unit were also used, but there was nothing. Police and firefighters were joined by volunteers, and by Friday of that week, divers had become part of the search. Michael's 4 children also traveled to Symi to help look for their missing father. By Sunday, several boats took to the waters of the beach. It was on this day, 4 days since Michael vanished, that an unfortunate revelation would be made. A cameraman aboard one of those boats had spotted something on the rocks on the other side of the beach. He'd seen something dark against the pale rocks. The boat began to move closer, and many tried to make out what the amorphous sight was. It was hard to identify against the jagged landscape. The cameraman took a picture of his camera screen with an iPhone and zoomed in on it. That amorphous shape was now clearly defined, and it was the body of a man, his hand still gripping his bag. Just the day before, a helicopter had passed over the same point 20 times. Drones had scoured the area too, and none had spotted the deceased man. As authorities investigated the body, they were able to confirm that this was the missing man, Michael Mosley. He'd been there for several days and appeared to have fallen down a steep slope before stopping against a fence. Police were unable to determine if this was an accident or the work of something more sinister. Authorities have considered numerous possibilities, from a fall to a snake bite and possibly even homicide. The circumstances around Michael's demise still remain unclear, the CCTV footage disturbingly revealing his very last movements. In some crime cases, CCTV footage serves as a poignant reminder of a life that has been lost, as is the case with footage that's been released by the police in India after a newlywed couple went missing, only for the groom to be found deceased shortly after. In the footage from the indoor home of Raja and Sonam Raghuvanshi, Raja can be seen coming out of the house with a bag over his shoulder and a suitcase in hand. He then gets on a scooter driven by someone else and heads out to the airport, where he then meets up with Sonam before the couple flew out to Meghalaya. Raja was the last of 3 brothers to get married. He was in charge of the family's transport business before his disappearance, and according to his family, he was a responsible and diligent man who was excited to start life with Sonam. Sonam hails from Kushwan Nagar in Indore, and at the time ran most of her family's business while also being in charge of the accounting, billing, and supervision of staff. Her marriage to Raja was an arranged one, and she seemed happy with the union, but it seemed that she also had feelings for another man named Raj, who once worked with her and is known to live near her family's home. Raja and Sonam met through a marriage directory in October of 2024. Each of their families decided that they would be a good match, and after they met for the first time, they agreed to get married. They tied the knot on the 11th of May, and on the 20th of that month, they set out on their honeymoon. But what happened next left both families devastated. On the 23rd of May, they checked out of their accommodation, and when no one could get a hold of them, they were reported missing. A search ensued, and for more than a week, nothing was found. Then, on the 2nd of June, Raja was found deceased in a gorge about 12 miles away, and 6 days later, Sonam suddenly emerged unharmed. It would then come to light that Raja's life had been ended by a group of men who were hired to carry out a hit, and they were taken into custody. Shortly after, Raj was also tracked down and arrested, and the reality of the case started to unfold. When all was said and done, 8 people were in custody, and the police had the unenviable task of figuring out how they were involved and to what degree. What is certain, though, is that Sonam orchestrated a hit on her husband, since she's confessed to this to the police. But the mystery is far from solved, thanks to one discovery that was made during a search. As is tradition, when a Hindu couple gets married, the bride is gifted a necklace, and when this necklace is placed around the bride's neck, it symbolizes the beginning of their union, much like rings in traditional Western weddings. But during one search, it was discovered that Sonam owned 2 Hindu marriage necklaces, and it's been speculated that she and Raj got married while she was in hiding after arranging for Raja's life to be ended. Number 9. The mystery of the murder of 2 men, Kyle Van Komen and Kevin Nelson, in Ogden, Utah, is one that persists as investigators have been unable to identify their attackers, despite having obtained CCTV footage of these men that shows them outside of Kyle's house before the attack. In December of 2016, Kyle shared a house with a few other men, 2 of whom were his brothers. The police were familiar with the residence, as it had gained a reputation for loud parties, but the group that lived there never caused any trouble, and they had a good relationship with their neighbors. On the night of the 9th of December that year, Kyle was supposed to go bowling with 2 of his brothers and a few friends, but his one brother, Brock, stated he wanted to get something to eat before they headed out. He and his stepbrother left the house and traveled to a supermarket to buy some microwavable food since it was cheap and convenient. What they didn't know was that 3 men had been outside the residence for some time, hiding in the bushes and waiting for the right moment to strike. CCTV footage of the group shows that they were wearing plastic masks, and as soon as Brock and his stepbrother stepped out, they approached the house with firearms drawn. But they didn't just enter the house, as they first looked through the windows to see who was left inside. The trip to the supermarket was a short one that only lasted about 10 minutes, and when Brock returned, he must have been astounded by what he found. It would later be revealed that as the two men left, one of their neighbors, Kevin Nelson, had walked over to the house to chat to Kyle and his roommates, which was not unusual since they got along well. The police were called to the house at 7:58 p.m., about 13 minutes after Brock left for the store. When they entered the house, they found Kyle and Kevin lying deceased on the floor. In the backyard, they found a third man who'd been injured with a firearm, but he was still miraculously alive. The third man was rushed to the hospital, where he was treated and would eventually recover. Investigators scoured the house and surrounding areas for more than 24 hours in hopes that they would find clues to the attackers' identities. Despite obtaining CCTV footage, they were unable to see their faces and hence had no idea who they were or why the crime was committed. The police released the CCTV footage to the public as they felt that someone in the neighborhood might recognize them. They were clearly familiar with the targeted house in some way, but no one came forward with any additional information. Investigators did find distinctive footprints outside the house and managed to find several shell casings inside the house that they hoped would narrow their search, but this was not the case. At one point, they interviewed a potential suspect, but he was quickly ruled out. The prevailing theory is that the three men had been at the house before, likely during a party, and while there, they may have seen items that they believed were valuable. They then returned to the house to steal these items, and in the process, ended Kyle and Kevin's lives. The investigation into this mystery is ongoing, and anyone with useful information is asked to contact the Weber County dispatchers at 801-629-8221. Number 8. Police have been on the hunt for a criminal who's been dubbed the Little Rock Killer since August of 2020, but have been unable to identify him as of yet. The man in question has been caught on CCTV, but has managed to remain elusive. The first of the attacks carried out by this man occurred on the 24th of August 2020. Just after 2 a.m. that morning, a member of the public called the police to report that they found a man deceased in the front yard of a house in Little Rock, Arkansas. Investigators found that the man, who was identified as 64-year-old Larry McChristian, had been attacked with a sharpened blade, and part of his crime was caught on surveillance footage. A $10,000 reward is being offered to anyone who comes forward with information leading to Larry's attacker's identity, but to date, no witnesses have added anything useful. But this was only the beginning of a terrifying crime spree in the area. On the 23rd of September that year, a friend of 62-year-old Jeff Welsh decided to stop by his house near the 12th Street substation for a visit, but when he arrived, he came upon a gruesome scene. Jeff was found on his porch, having been attacked with a blade, and he was no longer alive. The next part of this case involves the killer's only female victim, 43-year-old Deborah Walker. On the 11th of April 2021, she was walking along 19th and Marshall Streets when she was approached by a man who she'd never seen before, and out of nowhere, he produced a blade, which he then used to attack her. Luckily for Deborah, police officers happened upon her while she was stumbling around in disbelief at what had just happened, and she was rushed to a nearby hospital. She managed to survive and provided a description of the man, stating that he's an African American and stands over 6 feet tall. The last of his victims lost their life on the 12th of April 2021. On that day, 40-year-old Marlon Franklin was attacked just a block away from the attack on Deborah, and less than 24 hours later. Following this incident, the police announced they believed the crimes were related, and hence they were dealing with a serial killer who was operating in the Little Rock community. With no leads to follow, the CCTV footage was made available to the public, and it showed the attacker walking down a street before suddenly turning around and walking in the opposite direction. Unfortunately, due to the quality of the surveillance footage, the killer has never been identified, and investigators are still hopeful that someone will recognize him and come forward so he can be made to face justice for his actions. Number 7. 45-year-old Luke John Talega is at the center of a mystery that continues to baffle the police in Australia. But they do believe that several witnesses could help progress the case of his murder, and they've released CCTV images of 2 women, but they've yet to come forward. Hence, the case remains unsolved at this point. The last time that anyone saw Luke alive was at around 10 p.m. on the 31st of May 2025. At 9 a.m. on the 2nd of May, Hobart police officers responded to a call from a garbage contractor who found Luke's deceased body in an industrial-sized bin behind a Salvation Army store on Percy Street. Since the bin is located close to a hair salon, the contractor at first assumed that he was looking at a mannequin that was used for displays in the salon, but upon closer inspection, he realized it was not a mannequin. It never is. An autopsy was performed, and strangely, Luke's body showed no signs of injury, and it was assumed he'd accidentally fallen into the bin and then passed away, but the possibility of foul play has not been ruled out. But Luke's family was left confused by the fact that he was found in a bin. Hence, they provided investigators with a few photos in hopes that someone saw him that morning and could shed light on his last movements before he lost his life. His children were the last people to see him alive during a visit 2 nights earlier, which ended at around 10 p.m. No one knows where Luke went after leaving the house, and even more perplexing is the fact that he somehow ended up in the bin. Investigators did reveal that the area behind the Salvation Army shop is often frequented by homeless people, and they were aware that Luke had been struggling in recent months, leading to him becoming homeless. Hence, it's been suggested he was sleeping in the bin and then suffered a medical episode which resulted in his passing. The authorities went door to door, speaking to people who lived in the area and checking CCTV cameras for any potential leads. They were able to obtain footage proving that Luke took a bus from Toller Drive at around 4:30 p.m. on the 30th of May, and as he gets on, a woman dressed in a white hoodie follows close behind him. She got off the bus at the Shoreline Hotel parking lot. Footage from the inside of the bus shows a woman in a red top waving at him, but it's unknown whether they knew each other. To be clear, these 2 women are in no way believed to be connected to Luke's passing, but the police would like to speak to them to gather as much information about his last movements as possible. They've also stated that they would like to make contact with another woman who was seen in the footage standing near a store on Percy Street at around 7:50 on the 1st of June. It's believed that she may have spoken to Luke at some point, or may have seen which direction he was walking in. For now, none of these 3 women have been identified, and the police have asked that anyone who recognizes them or has any further useful information on Luke's case come forward by contacting them at 1-800-333-000. Number 6. The police in Leighton, South London, England, have identified at least 20 witnesses who were present when 18-year-old Alex Ajanaku's life was ended by an unknown individual, and they've appealed to them to come forward. The incident occurred at around 1:25 a.m. on the 1st of September 2021, when Alex and a few of his friends decided to attend an illegal rave that was being held in Leighton. At some point in the night, he and his friends decided to take a break and sat down on a bench, which is located on Beaumont Estate. Moments later, someone in a black Kia Sportage drove past, and while doing so, discharged a firearm at the group. Alex was hit, and unfortunately he passed away from his injuries. Investigators later revealed that the car was stolen from Chingford on the night of the 16th of August, almost 2 weeks before Alex was attacked. On the 3rd of September, a member of the public contacted the police to inform them of a burnt-out car that was found in Walthamstow. And when investigators arrived, they quickly determined that it was the vehicle used in the attack, which was caught on CCTV camera that night. In the footage, the car was seen as the driver makes their getaway after committing the crime. They can be seen turning down several streets in the area, and at one point they miss their turnoff and have to back up after hitting a speed bump at speed. After the footage was released to the public, a 43-year-old man was identified as a suspect. He was tracked down and detained, but after being questioned, it was determined that he wasn't responsible, and he was free to go. But the police have also released images of 20 people who were in the area when the crime was committed, and they're certain that at least one of them must know something that could help move the case forward. It's also been announced that a £20,000 or $26,000 reward is being offered to anyone who provides police with information, but no such information has been received. The motive for the crime remains unknown, and the case remains under investigation, but without further evidence being found, Alex's attacker remains unidentified. Number 5. The person or people responsible for the murder of a well-known British criminal, 65-year-old John Goldfinger Palmer, seemingly knew what they were doing on the day that they ended his life, since they carried out the act in the only area on his property that is not covered by CCTV cameras. Palmer was implicated in a gold heist that was carried out at Heathrow, but he managed to avoid prosecution, which earned him the moniker Goldfinger. At one point, he was considered to be the wealthiest criminal in all of Britain, having amassed a fortune of over £300 million, or around $402 million. At the time, it was the biggest robbery that had ever been carried out in Britain, and most of the gold was never found. The attack on Palmer took place at around 5:30 p.m. on the 24th of June 2015, while he was at home in Brentwood, Essex. His attackers entered the property by jumping over a garden fence, and after they fled, Palmer managed to walk towards his house but collapsed before reaching it, and he passed away. When the police arrived, it was assumed that he'd passed away from natural causes, since he'd recently undergone keyhole surgery on his chest. But when an autopsy was performed, it was discovered he'd been attacked with a firearm, and the property was searched. That's when it was discovered that the attackers had been watching him through a small hole in the fence, and they waited for the perfect moment to strike. In CCTV footage from the house, Palmer can be seen riding through his property on a small vehicle, and it's clear that he had no idea of the horrific crime that was about to take place. His partner, Christina Ketley, believes that the person responsible for the attack had been following him, and they managed to create a hole in the fence from where they kept an eye on Palmer until he was in the spot that was not covered by cameras. Many people feel that his life was ended due to his involvement in the 2015 Hatton Garden raid, in which 73 safety deposit boxes were emptied of their contents and £14 million worth of valuables and cash was stolen. Since Palmer was illiterate, he had a habit of recording conversations he had with his fellow criminals, who may have seen these recordings as potential evidence that could be used against them if they were to fall into the hands of the police. But this isn't the only theory as to what the motive was. Some people have pointed to the fact that Palmer was responsible for scamming as many as 17,000 people out of their money thanks to a timeshare racket that was carried out in Tenerife. The victims were convinced to pay deposits for apartment contracts that were then found out to not exist. For his involvement, Palmer was sent to jail for 8 years, but he continued to run the scam while he was incarcerated. After his release from prison, he had no choice but to reconnect with a few dangerous individuals who were members of the Russian mafia, since they were in the process of taking over many of his territories while he was behind bars. Furthermore, he was being sought by the police in Spain, who had also charged him over the Tenerife scam, just weeks before his life was ended. Many people who were close to Palmer stated that he was considering cooperating with prosecutors, and that the charges against him would be dropped if he agreed to reveal the names of his co-conspirators. Hence, many of his friends believe his life was ended to ensure his silence. Number 4. When some crimes are committed, the police are at a loss as to a motive, as was the case in an attack that was carried out against 36-year-old David Dick in Melbourne, Australia in 2017, which cost him his life. David is described by his family as a fun-loving and caring man who had a huge personality, though it should be noted that he had a long criminal history that may have led to the attack against him. The incident occurred in the parking lot of the Westfield Doncaster shopping mall at around 6:10 a.m. on the 3rd of February that year. David was on his way to work, and he would have believed it to be a normal day, just like any other, but that was about to change. According to his family, he would walk through the shopping mall at the same time every day to get to work, and hence his attacker may have been aware of his schedule. In CCTV footage, a man can be seen waiting for David to exit an elevator, and as soon as he does, he produces a long, bladed weapon, which he then uses to end his life. But the attacker was also injured in the ensuing scuffle, and investigators were able to track him for a short distance before the trail went cold. It's believed that this was a targeted attack, but the motive remains unclear and will likely remain unknown until the man in the footage is tracked down. Footage from the day before the incident shows the same young man carrying the same weapon in a yellow bag, present at the mall and seemingly stalking out the area where he planned to commit the crime. Hence, it's been speculated that he was hired to end David's life, or that he had personal reasons for doing so. The footage has now been made available in case anyone recognizes the man in question. Number 3. The family of 69-year-old Jeanette Moss is desperate for answers more than a decade after her life was ended, as no suspects have ever been named in her case, and it remains unsolved to this day. Jenny, as she was known to those close to her, is known to have visited a shopping center in Melbourne, Australia, just hours before she was attacked, as is evidenced by CCTV footage that shows her and a friend arriving at the mall and then leaving again a short while later. She was supposed to visit one of her neighbors the next day for a catch-up visit, and when she failed to arrive, her neighbor decided to go over to her apartment to check on her, and what she found there changed her life forever. The woman, Jeanette, entered the apartment using a spare key that had been given to her, and at first she couldn't find Jenny, but when she entered the bedroom, she found her lying on the floor deceased. It was clear that she'd been attacked since a piece of bedsheet was wrapped around her neck, and Jeanette immediately contacted the police. The friend who's seen in the footage stated that earlier that day they went to the gym to work out, and she never imagined that she'd be the last person to see her alive. It's believed that the attacker managed to enter the apartment by pressing the building's intercom buttons, or that they followed a fellow resident through the doors after they were unlocked. It's also been speculated that they managed to get in via the building's fire escape. The building was fitted with CCTV security cameras, but unfortunately they weren't operational at the time, and hence no footage of the culprit was available. When the police arrived, they found Jenny's TV was still on, and it was obvious that she'd been sitting on her couch since the sheets were still indented. The groceries that she'd brought home were scattered on the ground, suggesting a struggle had taken place. They also found a spanner lying on her kitchen bench, and Jeanette would later reveal that Jenny had been complaining about a leak under the kitchen sink, and it's likely why the spanner was being used. Strangely, investigators found that the dishwasher was still open. Empty beer bottles had been left out, and a half-empty bottle of red wine was sitting on the kitchen bench. This struck her family as odd, since she always kept her apartment very clean and was only known to drink white wine. Another baffling detail soon emerged. Jenny's family realized that her ring was missing, but that the rest of the jewelry she'd been wearing remained untouched. But it is known that she'd been selling some of her jewelry, since she insisted on paying for her 70th birthday celebrations. This has led investigators to believe that someone may have caught wind of the fact that she had a lot of jewelry, and this was the motive for her life being ended. But this remains speculation, as it's not been proven. A $1 million reward is on offer for information leading to an arrest, but Jenny's case has since gone cold, and only time will tell if her attacker will ever be apprehended. Number 2. In February of 2011, 60-year-old prominent horse owner and trainer Les Samba was in Melbourne, Australia for a yearling sale at Oaklands Junction when he was attacked and his life was ended. But more than 14 years later, the case remains unsolved. Witnesses described seeing Les leave the Crown Metropole Hotel that day, and others stated that they saw him running away from his attacker after being wounded, but he collapsed, allowing the attacker to catch up with him and end his life in the middle of a street. During the resulting investigation, cartridges from a different weapon were found, suggesting that more than one person was involved in the crime. As for a motive, many people feel that Les's life was ended due to his involvement with Ron Medich, with whom he'd entered a partnership with a horse called Sea Lord. Medich was implicated of being involved in ending the life of a property developer called Michael McGurk in 2009, and at the time, he'd been released on bail while awaiting the start of his trial. At one point, a jockey called Danny Nikolic was considered a suspect since he and Les's daughter Victoria had been married, but their marriage fell apart about 18 months before the attack took place. According to many sources, Les had been interfering in the divorce settlement, and it was speculated that Nikolic may have hired someone to end Les's life. but no evidence has been found to implicate him. He also provided an alibi, stating he was in Sydney at the time, and this checked out. He added that he couldn't speculate as to why Les's life was ended, since he didn't have too much to do with him, and hence knew very little about his day-to-day life. Nicholas's brother was questioned, and devices including cell phones and computers were seized from his property. He was jailed in Fiji after it was discovered that he was involved in the smuggling of illegal substances and weapons, but it remains unknown whether he was involved in the attack. But there is another aspect of this case that has left investigators baffled. CCTV footage shows Les leaving the Crown Metropole Hotel on the night of the attack. He then traveled to Middle Park, where his attacker lay in wait, and no one knows why he decided to go there. It's been speculated that his attacker managed to lure him to the park with the intention of ending his life, but this remains pure speculation. A $1 million reward was arranged for information leading to the attacker's identity. And 2 years after the fact, someone called the police in Victoria and provided them with crucial information. A year later, police revealed their belief was that Les was attacked over a $200,000 debt to an organized crime syndicate that was unpaid. The mystery caller was urged to call back, but it's now believed that they're no longer alive thanks to foul play. Number 1. Gang violence is an ongoing and growing problem all over the world. While these gangs often end the lives of opposing gang members, innocent people sometimes end up as victims, as was the case with two men, 29-year-old Adam and 22-year-old Ayol Akwi, whose lives were ended on the 11th of February, 2023. It's now been revealed by the police in Melbourne, Australia, that the two men were likely not the intended targets of the attack that ended their lives, and they were mistaken for rival gang members. On that night, the police were contacted and told that an incident had taken place at an address in Wyndham Vale in Melbourne, and that 3 men were seriously injured. Upon their arrival, they found Adam and Ayol had passed away from their injuries, and a third man, a 23-year-old who's not been named, was badly hurt. Several other people were present at the house where the incident occurred, but thankfully they were unharmed, which the police described as miraculous. After the crime scene was processed, investigators started looking for CCTV footage from the area and have released several different videos in hopes that someone will recognize the 2 men responsible. In recordings from minutes before the attack, 3 cars could be seen stopping on a street a short distance away from the house. Several men could be seen getting out of the vehicles to have a discussion, possibly after one of the men spotted Adam and Ayol and mistook them for their rivals. Then, at around 2:45 a.m., several vehicles pull up to the house, and it's believed that 5 men attacked the 2 victims in the garage. Further footage from before the attack was found at the Werribee gas station and shows 2 men exiting a black Toyota Estima before filling the car with gasoline. Another car that's believed to be involved was seen later at a fast food drive-in in Laverton North, and CCTV footage shows that it's a blue Toyota Camry with a distinctive silver hood. Unfortunately, none of these gang members could be identified, as they were still wearing face masks that were used during the crime. The men from the gas station footage are described as the first having a slim build, and he could be seen wearing a gray jumper with a red hood, black Nike pants, Nike slides, and a face mask. The second also has a slim build and was wearing a black hoodie with black pants and Nike sneakers. Several appeals have been made to the public for anyone who recognizes these men or the vehicles they were traveling in to come forward, but no one has, either because they're afraid of being retaliated against by the gang or because the men were able to completely hide their identities. Nevertheless, investigators are hopeful that someone with information will decide to do the right thing and contact them to report what they know. They've also added that no tip should be considered insignificant, as even the slightest detail could lead to a break in the case. If you or anyone you know recognizes the men in this footage, you're asked to contact Crime Stoppers at 1-800-333-000. Anyone submitting a tip can remain anonymous if they wish to do so. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.